So first, let's install Flask. So to do that, I have a virtual environment set up and I'll use pip to install it. So the command to install is pretty simple. Pip install Flask, and it will install Flask and its dependencies. And while that installs, I'll show you the project directory, which is simply the environment. And then I have a single guestbook.py file. This is where everything's going to be for our project. Typically in a real project, you'd have it spread out over multiple files. But to keep things simple, I'm going to keep everything in this one guestbook.py file in these videos. And Flask makes it really easy for you to do that. So if you're baking something really small, you don't have to split it up into many files. One file will get the job done. So it should be done installing, and it is. So I have my guestbook.py file open. So now let's write just a few lines of code to have our first app running. So the very first thing I need to do is actually import Flask. So what I'll do is say from Flask. So Flask is the library. Import Flask, which uppercase Flask means the class Flask that will help us instantiate our application. So I'm importing Flask. And then the next thing I need to do is actually instantiate an application. So to do this, I'll have an application and I'll call it app, and it will take Flask and I'll pass in the module name. So what this will do is create our application, and on this app object that I'm creating, this will hold all the configuration, all the routes, pretty much everything about our application will be related to this app somehow that I'm creating. So this is pretty much the first step in any application that you're creating in some form or another. And this video, it's pretty simple, just app equals Flask and then name. Now what I want to do is create a route. A route is a place where I can type in my browser, like www.flaskapp.com/something. That something is the route, and the web app could have functionality on multiple routes, and it handles that functionality anytime someone types that into their browser. So the code associated with that route will get run every time someone calls that route through their browser. And of course, it doesn't have to be a browser. It can be some other process, maybe like an API, a curl call, some application that can send HTTP requests, but typically it's going to be a browser-based call. That's how we're all familiar with web apps, and that's how pretty much everyone starts off learning them. But just know that it's just HTTP requests in general. So the first route that I'm going to create is going to be on the index. So it won't have that something. It's just going to be www.flaskapp.com with nothing else. That is the index. So to do that, I have a decorator here, and it's going to be app.route. And the single parameter that I'm going to pass in here is the actual endpoint where I want the route to point to. And it's going to be / meaning the index. Then I need to create a view function under that decorator. So I'll call this index. And the code that's in this index will get run every time someone goes to the index on the application. So this will make much more sense when I actually run it. So let me just type in some code here. I'm going to type in some HTML. So I'm going to return a header tag saying hello there. And then I'll close it out with H1. And then finally, the last thing I want to do is I'll do an if name equals main statement, basically meaning if I call this file directly from the command line, I want it to execute what follows here. So if I call it directly from the command line, which I will do in a second, I'll just simply run the app. So app.run, and I'll put it in debug mode. So I'll pass in debug equals true. It will help us if there are any errors when it runs. So that's it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code, and that will be our first Flask app. So let me go here and run it from the command line. So Python and then guestbook.py. And now we see it's running on 127.0.01 port 5000. So that's where I'm going to go in my browser. 127.0.0.1 5000. And like I said, there's no endpoint beyond just the index. So just /. I don't even need the /, but I'm just leaving it there. So as soon as I hit enter, my app gets called and it returns the hello there that I have in my view function for the index, which is hello there. So as you can see, it's very easy to get a Flask app up and running. And we see here in the command line where the app is actually running, we see that there is a request on the index and it returned 200. There is a request for the fav icon as well, but I don't have one, so it returned 404, but that's not too important. The important part is having a Flask app that's running and returns something, and that something is hello there. So in the next video, I'll talk a little more about how endpoints work, and I'll show you some different endpoints that we can create using this app.